I'm Emma Larson, 18 years old, standing in the tense silence of a Seattle dinner table, my heart racing with a mix of rage and resolve. My stepmom, Claire, declared herself my real mom, dismissing my late mother, Sarah, who passed when I was 10, leaving me with only her old necklace as a memory. For years, Claire's jealousy fueled her attempts to erase Sarah's legacy, her snide remarks cutting deeper each time. That night, when she interrupted my story about Mom with her bold claim, I knew I had to act. The truth I unleashed left her stunned, and the room in shock, a moment I'll never forget. But how did I turn her arrogance into my triumph? Before I reveal the full story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and join me as I unfold this tale of betrayal and sweet revenge. The rain-soaked streets of Seattle framed my childhood, a city where the misty air and towering evergreens cast long shadows over our modest home near Green Lake, a place where the dampness seemed to seep into the very walls of our lives. Growing up, our house was a haven of quiet strength, shaped by a mother whose warmth lingered in the scent of her homemade bread wafting from the kitchen, the soft hum of her voice as she knitted scarves by the fireplace, a soothing balm against the world's harshness. Her sudden passing at 10 left a void that echoed through every room, a silence broken only by the steady presence of my father, a shipping company worker whose broad shoulders carried a grief he hid behind a stoic mask, his eyes often gazing out at the Puget Sound from our back porch as if searching for answers in the waves. I stepped into the role she'd left behind, tending to the household with a determination that felt both heavy and necessary, scrubbing pots with a sponge that felt too small for my growing hands, sorting bills with a calculator that clicked under my unsure fingers, the numbers blurring as I tried to keep our home afloat. My younger brother, Liam, just 8 when she died, leaned on me for comfort, his small frame curling into mine during thunderstorms that rattled our windows, his whimpers quieted by tales of brave nights I read with a shaky but steady voice, a ritual that bound us in our shared loss. That fragile balance held until a whirlwind entered 2 years later, a woman with a sharp tongue and bold energy who married my father and claimed our home with an assertiveness that felt like a storm breaking over the calm. Claire, 43, arrived with a presence that disrupted our quiet grief. Her auburn hair perfectly styled and her wardrobe a mix of vibrant hues that clashed with our muted tones. Her elaborate meals, roast chicken with rosemary that filled the air with unfamiliar scents, and outings to the Seattle waterfront, where her laughter echoed over the seagulls as she pushed Liam on the swings, masked a tension that simmered beneath. Her rivalry with my mother's memory grew as she rearranged photos on the mantel, muttering about clutter, or suggested donating my mother's clothes, her voice laced with a forced cheerfulness that felt hollow and invasive. The old necklace, a delicate silver charm from my mother, became my silent rebellion, its weight a constant defiance against her efforts to erase the past, a talisman I clutched when her words cut too deep. The betrayal crept in slowly, like the fog rolling off Puget Sound, its chills seeping into our lives with an insidious persistence. Her comments began with light jabs. "You don't need to cling to the past," with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes, but sharpened over time into weapons of control. She'd interrupt my stories about my mother with a dismissive wave, insisting, "Let's focus on now, Emma," her tone a command that silenced me, or critique the necklace as dated, her sneer twisting her lips into a mask of superiority. At family gatherings, she'd steer conversations to her own childhood in Spokane, her voice rising to drown out my quiet memories, her laughter a barrier I couldn't cross, a wall that separated me from the past she despised. I noticed Liam growing distant, his eyes seeking her approval when he spoke of school projects or shared a drawing, a shift that gnawed at me and made me question her influence over his young mind. My friends at school, like Mia, a budding artist with a keen eye for detail, and Jake, a tech-savvy classmate with a quiet wit, began whispering about her odd behavior, her habit of overshadowing my grief with her own narrative. Her words a steady drip of control that eroded my sense of safety. The first real crack came when I was 15, a memory that still burns with a quiet fury. She decided to redecorate my room, boxing up my mother's old books, fairy tales with dog-eared pages she'd read to me, their covers worn from love, and a quilt she'd sewn, its patches a mosaic of her care, claiming I needed a fresh start to move forward. I found the boxes in the garage, the quilt's faded pattern a lifeline to my past, its threads holding fragments of a life she wanted to erase. I confronted her in the kitchen, the air heavy with the scent of her lavender cleaner, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. "This was hers," I said, holding up the quilt. She smirked, replying, "She's gone, Emma. I'm here now. Let me be your mother." The words hit like a slap, a blow that left me reeling. And though I retrieved the items in silence, my trust in her began to unravel like an old rope fraying under strain. Over the years, her efforts to replace my mother intensified. She'd buy me clothes mimicking Mom's style, soft cardigans, floral dresses, only to mock my preference for the originals, saying they were out of fashion with a laugh that stung, or push therapy to move on from my grief, her condescension making my skin crawl with every suggestion. She even tried to replace my mother's teapot, a chipped ceramic piece I'd cherished, with a sleek modern one, tossing the old one into the trash with a casual, "It's time to let go," her eyes daring me to object. My father, caught between us, became a silent mediator, his weary sighs filling the gaps as he urged me to give her a chance with a pleading look, his hands clasped as if in prayer. "She's trying to be part of the family," he'd say, his voice low, but his eyes betrayed his unease, a man trapped in a web of his own making. Liam, once my shadow, began mimicking her phrases, calling my mother's keepsakes old junk, with a shrug, a betrayal that cut deeper than I'd expected, his innocence swayed by her influence. The house, once a sanctuary of my mother's love, felt like a battlefield, each room a reminder of the past Claire sought to bury with her relentless campaigns. At 16, she criticized a school project where I'd included a photo of my mother, suggesting I focus on the present, with a tone that dripped with judgment, her red pen marking through my work as if erasing my mother's image. My friends noticed too. Mia once caught her rolling her eyes when I mentioned a memory of Mom during a sleepover, while Jake remarked on her habit of redirecting conversations to herself, her voice a constant undercurrent of dominance. The tension reached a boiling point last year when Claire hosted a dinner for her parents, a formal affair in our dining room with a view of the Seattle skyline, the city lights twinkling like distant stars against the night sky. I wore the necklace, its silver catching the chandelier's glow, a quiet tribute amidst the stiffness of the occasion. Her mother, Margaret, a kind woman with silver hair, asked about it, her eyes softening with curiosity. "It was my mom's," I said, my voice catching as I touched the charm, a lump forming in my throat. Before I could elaborate, Claire cut in, her voice slicing through the room like a blade. "Well, technically, I'm your mom now. I've done more mothering in the last 8 years than she did in 10. The table froze, forks suspended midair, a silence so thick it pressed against my chest, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and disbelief. My blood boiled, her words a dagger to my mother's memory, a blatant attempt to overwrite the woman who'd shaped me with her hands and heart. In that moment, I knew I couldn't let it slide, her arrogance igniting a fire within me that demanded retribution, a flame that refused to be extinguished. That night, as I lay awake, the rain tapping my window like a metronome to my racing thoughts, a plan took root. A way to turn her arrogance into my weapon, to reclaim my voice and to honor the mother she dared to erase with every fiber of my being. The signs of her rivalry had been building for years, each incident a brick in the wall of my distrust, a structure that grew taller with every slight. At 13, she'd replaced my mother's favorite teapot, a chipped ceramic piece I'd cherished for its imperfections, with a sleek modern one, tossing the old one into the trash with a casual, "It's time to let go," her eyes daring me to object as I fished it out, my hands shaking with anger. At 17, she questioned my choice to join a school play, suggesting I focus on practical skills instead, her tone a subtle jab at my mother's encouragement of my creativity, her words lingering like a bitter aftertaste. These moments, small but cumulative, fueled a quiet anger I'd suppressed, fearing I'd alienate my father or push Liam further into her orbit. My friends became my confidants. Mia sketched portraits of my mother from my descriptions during late-night talks, a silent support that kept me grounded, while Jake helped me archive old family videos, preserving Sarah's voice against Claire's erasure, his quiet encouragement a lifeline. The dinner incident was the breaking point, her audacity a spark that lit the fuse of my resolve. I spent hours that night plotting, my mind racing with ways to expose her, to make her feel the weight of her words, a retribution that would echo through our family and restore the honor she'd trampled with her careless claim. The night Claire's words sliced through the dinner table, a storm brewed inside me, a tempest of rage and disbelief that kept me awake as the rain tapped relentlessly against my window, each drop a reminder of the betrayal that had unfolded. Her bold declaration, "I've done more mothering in the last 8 years than she did in 10, reverberated in my mind, each syllable a barb that dug deeper into the tender wound of my mother's memory, a wound that pulsed with every heartbeat. I tossed and turned, the sheets tangling around my legs like chains, my heart pounding with a chaotic rhythm that mirrored the chaos within. The silence that followed her statement, the frozen stares of her parents and my father, had been a fleeting victory I hadn't anticipated, but it left me hollow, my chest tight with a mix of triumph and uncertainty. I knew I couldn't let her arrogance stand unchallenged, not when it trampled the legacy of the woman who'd shaped me with her gentle hands, but the path ahead felt like a tightrope stretched over a chasm of family discord, each step a risk that could shatter the fragile threads holding us together. The weight of my decision pressed down, a burden that made sleep elusive, my mind racing with the fear of losing my father's approval or pushing Liam further into her influence. The days that followed were a blur of inner turmoil, a battle waged within the confines of my small bedroom where the walls seemed to close in with every passing hour, the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains casting eerie shadows across the floor. I replayed the scene endlessly, Claire's smug smirk as she delivered her claim, the way her voice had risen to dominate the conversation, drowning out my quiet tribute to my mother, the way my father's plea for peace had fallen flat against her audacity, his eyes pleading but powerless. Doubt crept in like a thief, a whisper that questioned whether I'd overreacted, whether my sharp retort had been worth the tension it unleashed. A tension that now hung over our home like a storm cloud. The guilt gnawed at me, a bitter taste that lingered on my tongue, as I wondered if confronting her would drive my father and Liam further into her orbit, leaving me isolated in a house that no longer felt like a sanctuary. Yet, beneath that guilt burned a fiercer resolve, a fire stoked by the memory of my mother's gentle touch and the necklace that hung heavy around my neck, its cool metal a symbol of the love Claire sought to erase. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Her actions weren't just about control, they were an assault on the past I held dear, and I needed to fight back with every ounce of strength I could muster. The thought of her rewriting my history fueled my determination, a silent vow to protect my mother's legacy against her relentless campaign. Support came from unexpected corners, a lifeline that steadied me as the storm raged within. My best friend Mia, an art student with a sharp mind and a sketchbook filled with bold strokes, noticed the change in me during our usual coffee meetups at a cozy cafe near the University District, the aroma of roasted beans a faint comfort against my turmoil. One rainy afternoon, as the steam from our lattes curled between us like a fragile bridge, I broke down, my voice cracking as I recounted Claire's dinner outburst and the years of subtle jabs that had worn me down. "She's trying to rewrite my mother out of existence," I said, my hands trembling around the cup, the warmth seeping into my cold fingers. Mia's eyes narrowed, her pencil pausing mid-sketch, a line of charcoal smudging the page. "That's not just rivalry, that's erasure, Emma. You can't let her win. We'll find a way to fight back." Her bluntness cut through my fog, a clarity that bolstered my resolve, her steady presence a rock in my churning sea of emotions. She offered to help, pulling out her phone to record voice memos of my memories about my mother, preserving them against Claire's influence. Her voice a soothing guide as she prompted me to recall every detail. Sarah's favorite songs, her laughter during rainy walks. Another ally emerged in Jake, a tech-savvy classmate with a quiet intensity that hid a brilliant mind, who'd often helped me with school projects in the library's dim light, the scent of old books a backdrop to our late-night sessions. Over a study break one evening, as the rain pattered against the windows, I confided in him about Claire's behavior, my voice low as I detailed her attempts to replace my mother's keepsakes with her own trinkets. "She's manipulating the narrative," Jake said, his fingers tapping a rhythm on his laptop, the screen glowing with code. "We can gather evidence, emails, texts, anything she said. I'll set up a secure drive." He worked tirelessly, downloading screenshots of Claire's dismissive messages about my mother's belongings, each file a piece of the puzzle that fueled my determination, his quiet encouragement a lifeline in my despair. Their support lifted me, a buoy in a sea of doubt, but it also amplified the pressure. I couldn't let their faith in me falter, not when they'd risked their time and trust to stand by my side. Their belief in me a mirror to the strength I needed to find. The investigation became my obsession, a relentless pursuit that consumed my days and nights, each clue a step toward confrontation that fueled my growing resolve. I started by revisiting old family albums, the pages yellowed and brittle, their edges crumbling as I turned them, searching for photos that captured my mother's essence. Her smile at a picnic by Lake Washington, her hands guiding mine in the garden during a rare sunny day, her figure blurred but radiant in the background of a Christmas morning. I cross-checked dates with my father's work records, noting times when Claire had pushed for new traditions that conveniently overlapped with my mother's anniversaries, a pattern that chilled me to the bone, each entry a confirmation of her intent. Mia suggested I talk to Liam, and one evening, as the city lights flickered outside his window, I found him sketching quietly, his pencils scattered across the desk. "Does Claire ever talk about Mom?" I asked, my voice gentle, my heart pounding with hope. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze, his young face clouded with uncertainty. "She says we should focus on now. It's easier that way." His words stung, a confirmation of her influence, and I hugged him tightly, vowing to shield him from her sway, my arms a fortress against her manipulation. The pressure from my father grew, an unrelenting tide that threatened to drown my resolve in a sea of guilt and obligation. Peter called daily, his voice heavy with concern, asking about my attitude toward Claire with a tremor that broke my heart into jagged pieces. "She's trying to connect," he'd say, his words a plea for harmony that clashed with the truth I'd uncovered, his tone laced with a desperation that made my chest ache. I dodged his questions, my tongue twisting around vague replies. "I'm just processing things," my stomach churning with the lie, the guilt a lead weight that anchored me to the floor, rooting me in place as I struggled to breathe. His insistence that I make peace with her only deepened my isolation. A prisoner of the secret I carried, the weight of his trust in her pressing down like a storm cloud that darkened my every thought. Relatives added to the burden. My Aunt Linda called with gentle advice, her voice soft but insistent like a persistent drizzle, while my cousin Mark texted sympathy that felt like barbs piercing my skin, their concern a constant reminder of the family I might lose if I pushed too far. School became a battleground of distraction and despair, a place where I sought refuge but found little peace amidst the storm within. My teachers noticed my distraction during class discussions, their questions about my focus met with mumbled excuses. "I've been busy." My grades slipping as my mind replayed Claire's words, her voice a haunting echo in my thoughts. One afternoon, my history teacher, Mrs. Carter, pulled me aside after a lecture on the Civil War, her office smelling of old books and chalk dust, the air thick with the weight of her concern. "You've been off, Emma," she said, her tone kind but firm, her glasses glinting under the fluorescent light. "Family trouble?" I nodded, unable to meet her eyes, the shame of our dysfunction searing my cheeks like a brand, my silence a shield against the truth. She offered a pass to the counselor, a gesture of support that I accepted but barely used. The solitude of my thoughts a heavier burden than the advice I couldn't bring myself to seek. Friends like Mia and Jake became my sanctuary, their late-night calls a lifeline as I vented my frustrations, their encouragement a faint light in the darkness, their voices a chorus that kept me from sinking. The plan took shape over sleepless nights, my room a war zone of scattered notes and whispered strategies, the desk littered with crumpled paper and the faint scent of ink. I sketched out scenarios on scrap paper, the pen scratching against the page as I weighed my options. Confront Claire alone in a quiet moment, involve my father to force a family discussion, or wait for another public moment to strike. Mia suggested recording her next outburst, a tactic to capture her true nature on tape, her artistic mind envisioning the evidence as a canvas of truth. Jake proposed a subtle probe, asking her about my mother in front of others to gauge her reaction, his technical expertise offering a strategic edge. I settled on a direct approach for the next family dinner, planning to challenge her with pointed questions about my mother's legacy, armed with the evidence I'd gathered, photos, voice memos, and screenshots, each piece a weapon in my arsenal. The days leading up to it were a haze of anxiety, my stomach knotting as I rehearsed my words in front of the mirror, my reflection a mix of determination and dread, the necklace glinting as a reminder of what I fought for. I practiced my tone, my gestures, imagining her reaction. Would she deny it, lash out, or crumble? Each scenario a rehearsal for the battle ahead. The pressure from Peter intensified, his calls growing more urgent, his voice breaking as he begged me to let it go, with a desperation that tore at my soul. "She's your family now," he'd say, his words a plea that clashed with the evidence I'd uncovered, his tone a mix of exhaustion and hope that made my resolve waver. I dodged his pleas, my guilt a heavy cloak that draped over my shoulders, the lie I told, "I'll think about it," a shield against his disappointment, but my determination sharpened like a blade, cutting through the fear and doubt that threatened to derail me. Relatives joined the chorus. Linda's calls grew more frequent, her advice a gentle rain that soaked my resolve, while Mark's texts hinted at family gossip, his sympathy a double-edged sword that both supported and judged me. The weight of their expectations pressed down, isolating me in a bubble of my own making, a prisoner of the secret I carried, the silence of my room a stark contrast to the chaos I planned to unleash. Work at the community center, where I tutored kids after school, became a fleeting escape, the chatter of young voices a temporary reprieve from my turmoil. But even there, my focus faltered. My students noticed my distracted nods, their questions about math problems met with half-hearted answers, my mind drifting to the dinner ahead. My supervisor, Mr. Hayes, a gruff man with a soft spot for his staff, pulled me aside one day, his office smelling of coffee and paper. "You're off your game, Emma," he said, his voice a mix of concern and authority. "Something at home?" I nodded, the shame of our family secret burning my cheeks, and he offered a flexible schedule, a kindness that deepened my solitude as I retreated into my planning. Mia and Jake became my anchors, their late-night calls stretching into dawn, their voices a lifeline as we brainstormed strategies. How to phrase my challenge, how to present the evidence, how to brace for the fallout. They brought snacks, chips, and soda cans that cluttered my desk, turning my room into a war council, their laughter a brief respite from the tension. The preparation intensified, a meticulous process that consumed my every thought. I compiled a folder of evidence, organizing photos in chronological order, transcribing voice memos into a notebook, the ink smudging under my trembling fingers as I relived each memory. I practiced my confrontation in front of Mia, her critiques sharpening my delivery, pause for effect, let her squirm, while Jake tested the recorder's range, ensuring every word would be captured. I mapped out the dinner layout, imagining where I'd stand, where Claire would sit, how the light would fall on her face as I spoke. The fear of failure loomed large. What if she turned the tables? What if my father disowned me? But the certainty of her guilt, etched in every piece of evidence, pushed me forward. I visualized her reaction, her eyes widening, her voice faltering, each image a fuel for my resolve, a promise of the justice I sought. The night before, I barely slept, the rain a lullaby to my restless mind, my plan a fortress I built against the doubt, ready to face the storm I'd set in motion. The night of the next family dinner arrived like a tempest gathering strength over the Seattle skyline, the air thick with a charged anticipation that prickled my skin as I stood outside our home near Green Lake, my pulse hammering in my ears like a war drum, signaling the onset of battle. My hands trembled around the small recorder nestled deep in my jacket pocket, its cold metal a silent promise of the confrontation I'd meticulously planned over weeks of sleepless nights, while a folder of evidence, faded photos capturing my mother's radiant smile, transcribed voice memos preserving her tender voice, and screenshots of Claire's venomous texts pressed against my chest like a shield forged from the past she'd sought to obliterate. The city's lights shimmered faintly through the drizzle, a distant glow that stood in stark contrast to the turmoil churning within me, a turmoil that had grown from a flicker of doubt into a roaring fire of resolve. I'd rehearsed every word, every gesture, my reflection in the mirror that morning, a blend of steely determination and gnawing dread, the necklace glinting as a beacon of the cause I championed. Claire remained oblivious to the storm brewing, her arrogance a blind spot I intended to shatter, and the thought of her stunned silence propelled me forward, a surge of adrenaline burning away the last vestiges of hesitation. I drew a deep breath, the cool, damp air stinging my lungs, and stepped inside, the familiar creak of the door a herald that the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. The dining room buzzed with the clatter of plates and the soft hum of conversation. Claire's parents, Margaret and Harold, seated alongside my father and Liam around the polished oak table, its surface reflecting the chandelier's warm glow like a stage set for drama. The aroma of roasted lamb and rosemary permeated the space, a meal Claire had crafted with her characteristic flair, her auburn hair catching the light as she moved with purpose between the kitchen and table, her presence commanding attention. I slipped into my chair, my hands steady despite the tempest within, the folder resting beside my plate like a loaded weapon waiting to be unleashed. Margaret, her silver hair framing a kind face etched with years, offered me a warm smile across the table. "That necklace is lovely, dear," she remarked, her voice a gentle ripple in the room's current. "It was my mother's," I replied, my tone soft yet resolute, my fingers brushing the silver charm with a reverence that stilled the air for a fleeting moment. "She gave it to me before she passed." The words carried the weight of memory, a tribute to Sarah. And for an instant, the room seemed to soften, a brief reprieve before the storm. But Claire couldn't resist the opportunity to assert her dominance. Her fork clinked sharply against her plate as she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with a blend of irritation and smug triumph. "Well, technically, I'm your mom now," she declared, her voice cutting through the quiet like a shard of glass, loud enough to pivot every head in the room. "I've done more mothering in the last 8 years than she did in 10. The table froze, fork suspended midair, a silence so profound it pressed against my chest like a physical force, my heart skipping a beat as a wave of rage surged through my veins. Her words were a vicious assault on my mother's memory, a brazen attempt to overwrite the woman who had shaped me with her love and sacrifice, and the smug curl of her lips ignited a fire I could no longer suppress. My hands clenched into fists, the recorder's edge biting into my palm, and I knew this was the pivotal moment I'd prepared for, a crossroads where action would define my future. "Is that so?" I said, my voice steady despite the tempest roaring within, a calm that masked the fury building like a crescendo. I reached for the folder with deliberate intent, my fingers brushing the worn edges as I pulled out the first photo, a faded snapshot of my mother laughing at a park, her eyes alight with joy, a moment frozen in time. "This is what a mother looks like," I said, sliding it across the table with a force that made it skid to a stop before Claire, my voice rising with each syllable. "She taught me resilience, love, values you've never grasped." Her smirk faltered, her eyes flickering to the image, but I pressed on, unwilling to let her retreat. I activated the voice memo Mia had recorded, my mother's voice spilling into the room, soft, warm, calling my name during a rainy day walk along the Seattle waterfront, each note a dagger piercing Claire's fabricated claim. The room grew eerily still, the clink of cutlery replaced by the haunting echo of her laughter, a sound that seemed to mock Claire's audacity and expose her hollow pretense. "You've spent years trying to erase her," I continued, my tone sharpening as I spread out the screenshots, texts where she'd labeled my mother's keepsakes trash, emails urging my father to move on from Sarah with a cold indifference. "But you can't mother someone by burying their past. You can only pretend." Claire's face drained of color, her hands trembling as she reached for a glass of water, her composure fracturing like thin ice under pressure. "That's enough, Emma," my father interjected, his voice a low growl that vibrated with shock, his eyes wide as he leaned forward, his chair scraping against the floor. "Apologize to her right now." But I shook my head, my resolve hardening into an unyielding steel, my gaze locked on his. "No, Dad, I'm done pretending her lies don't wound me. She's not my mother. She's a shadow trying to steal what's mine, and I won't let it continue." I turned on the recorder fully, its red light glowing like a sentinel in the dim light, and demanded she justify her actions, my voice a command that brooked no retreat. Her resistance crumbled beneath the weight of my stare, her shoulders slumping as if the burden of her deceit had finally crushed her spirit, and she stammered, "I just wanted to be part of your life. I didn't mean to hurt you." The admission hung in the air, a feeble shield against the avalanche of evidence I'd unleashed, and I felt a surge of triumph, a bitter victory that left my hands trembling with the intensity of the moment. The room erupted into chaos, a symphony of reactions that filled the space with a cacophony of tension and emotion. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. her eyes darting between me and Claire with a mixture of horror and disbelief, her silver hair trembling as she shook her head. Harold muttered a curse under his breath, his face reddening with shame as he stared at his daughter, his fingers tightening around his napkin. Liam shifted uncomfortably, his young face clouded with confusion, his small hands clutching the table's edge as if anchoring himself in the storm. "How could you do this to her?" Margaret whispered, her voice breaking into fragments that scattered across the room, a mother's disappointment cutting through the silence like a knife. My father slammed his fist on the table, the sound a gunshot that shattered the stillness, his voice a roar of betrayal that shook the walls and rattled the framed photos above the mantel. "Claire, what have you done? You lied to us all!" His eyes burned with a fire that mirrored my own, a father grappling with the truth I'd forced into the open, his anger a tempest that matched the fury in my chest. Claire sank deeper into her chair, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body, the sound raw and unfiltered, a cry that reverberated off the walls like a wounded animal's wail, each gasp a testament to her unraveling facade. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she choked out, her voice muffled through her fingers, her shoulders heaving with each ragged breath as tears streamed down her cheeks like a river breaking its banks. "I just wanted to be loved, to be needed by someone." I stood over her, my stance unyielding, my anger a fortress against the flood of her tears, my arms crossed as I stared down with an intensity that could melt steel. "You wanted to be needed by erasing her? You turned our grief into a ladder to climb into a role you'll never deserve." Her eyes met mine, red and pleading, tears carving paths through the makeup she'd so carefully applied. But I felt no pity, only a cold satisfaction that her mask had finally shattered. "You had every chance to be honest," I said, switching off the recorder with a decisive snap that echoed like a judge's gavel, gathering my evidence with a deliberate slowness that underscored my control, my movements a silent declaration of victory. She lunged forward, her hand grasping my arm with a desperate grip, her nails digging into my skin like claws seeking purchase, her voice a frantic plea that bordered on hysteria. "Please, Emma, don't do this to me. They'll never forgive me. Don't tear us apart." I pulled free, my voice as cold as the steel of a blade forged in my anger. "You should have considered that before you lied, before you built this house of cards on our pain. This is your reckoning." The argument escalated into a clash of voices that filled the room with a cacophony of tension, each word a spark igniting the powder keg of our fractured family. A symphony of pain and accusation that reverberated off the walls like a thunderclap. Claire accused me of treachery, her words sharp as shattered glass slicing through the air with a venomous edge. "You've ruined everything, Emma. Family should protect each other, not expose each other like this, leaving us to bleed in the open," she cried, her fists trembling with indignation, her face a mask of wounded pride that masked the shame beneath. I met her gaze unflinching, my eyes locked with hers in a battle of wills that felt like a duel to the death, a contest of truth against the deception she'd woven. "Family doesn't lie to erase a mother's memory. You broke that trust, not me. I had to shield her legacy from your selfish scheme." My father stepped between us, his voice a commanding cut through the chaos, his towering presence a wall of authority that demanded obedience and stilled the room with its power. "Enough! Both of you, sit down and be silent," he ordered, his tone a whip crack that echoed with the weight of his disappointment, his hands raised as if to hold back the storm. He turned to Claire, his eyes as cold as the steel of a winter blade, his jaw set with a resolve that brooked no argument. "You need to leave this house. We need time to process this unforgivable betrayal that has shattered our trust." Her face crumpled, a chaotic blend of shock and defiance warring in her expression, her lips quivering as she struggled to find words to defend herself. But she grabbed her bag and stormed out, the door slamming with a finality that reverberated through the walls like a judge's gavel striking wood, leaving a void that swallowed the warmth of the room and plunged it into a chilling silence. The aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions that swept through the house like a tornado tearing through a fragile landscape, leaving destruction and debris in its wake. Margaret wouldn't look at me, her tears a glistening barrier between us, her shoulders hunched as if carrying the unbearable weight of her daughter's lies, her grief a tangible presence that pressed against my conscience like a stone. Harold paced the room, his anger a tempest that mirrored my father's, his footsteps a rhythmic march across the hardwood floor, his shadow stretching long and dark against the wall. "How could she stoop so low?" he muttered, his voice thick with shame, his hands clenching into fists as he glared at the door Claire had exited. Liam sat frozen, his young face a canvas of confusion and fear, his small hands clutching the table's edge as if anchoring himself in the storm that had engulfed our family, his eyes darting between me and my father with a lost expression. My father turned to me, his face a mask of pain and accusation, his brow furrowed with a depth of sorrow I'd rarely seen. "You should have come to me first, Emma," he said, his words a knife twisting in my side, his eyes searching mine for an explanation that might ease his torment. "We could have handled this as a family, worked through it with the love we've always had." I shook my head, my voice firm despite the ache blossoming in my chest, my hands steady on the table as I faced his judgment. "She had her chance, Dad. I couldn't let her keep lying, feeding you a fantasy while she drained our trust and twisted Liam's memories. You deserved the truth, no matter how much it costs us." The room felt like a battlefield, strewn with the wreckage of our bonds, the air thick with unspoken accusations and the bitter sting of betrayal, a scene frozen in the aftermath of a war I'd ignited with my revelation. That night, Claire called, her voice a volatile mix of rage and desperation that crackled through the phone like static on a broken line, a sound that grated on my nerves and set my teeth on edge. "You've destroyed my life, Emma. They'll never forgive me now. How could you do this to your own family, to the bond we once shared?" she sobbed, her words a barrage of guilt and accusation that struck like arrows. I hung up, the weight of her pleas lingering like a bruise on my soul, a mark that throbbed with every heartbeat, but my resolve held firm, a steel core tempered in the crucible of her lies, unyielding against the storm of her blame. The next morning, the fallout spread like ripples across a still pond, disturbing the calm of our family's fragile facade with a force that rippled through my life and left tremors in its wake. My father texted, his words stark and cold. "Stay away for now, Emma. We need space to heal from this wound you've opened." A message that sliced through me like a blade, leaving a wound that pulsed with every reread, a cut that refused to close. Margaret's silence was louder, her absence from my calls a void that echoed with her pain, her unreturned voicemails a testament to her heartbreak that cut deeper than any blade, a silence that spoke volumes of her shattered trust and the love she couldn't express. I tried reaching out, leaving voicemails that went unanswered, my voice cracking as I pleaded for a chance to explain, to bridge the gap her lies had widened with a bridge of understanding. "Dad, Margaret, I did this for her memory," I said into the void, my words swallowed by the silence, lost in the ether of their grief, a plea that hung unanswered in the air. The isolation was suffocating, a solitary confinement within the four walls of my room, where every creak of the floorboards reminded me of the family I'd lost. The laughter that once filled those spaces, now a distant echo, replaced by the ghosts of our broken trust. Claire's calls persisted, her voice a relentless barrage of venom and pleading that grated on my nerves like sandpaper on raw skin. "You've torn us apart with your righteous anger," she said one night, her words a dagger aimed at my heart, a thrust meant to wound and guilt me into submission. I muted her, the conflict within me a battlefield, where duty to my mother's memory clashed with the love I still held for my father and Liam. But the evidence, her confession, the photos, the texts, stood as my shield, a bulwark against her blame that held firm against the storm. The community's reaction was a mixed tapestry, a kaleidoscope of support and scorn that painted my days with contrasting hues. At a school art exhibit, Mia's friend Sarah offered a quiet nod of solidarity, her understanding a rare light in the gloom, a flicker of kindness that warmed my heart, while a neighbor's cold stare at the Pike Place market reminded me of the divide, her disapproval a silent sermon delivered with a turned back. The pressure mounted, a crucible that tested the limits of my endurance, forging me into someone stronger with every challenge. Teachers at school noticed my distraction, their concern a faint hum against the storm within, their offers of extra help a kindness I accepted but struggled to utilize, my mind too consumed by the fallout. Mia and Jake became my anchors, their late-night calls stretching into the early hours, their voices a lifeline as we processed the chaos. "You did what was right," Mia said, her tone firm as she sketched a portrait of my resolve, while Jake added, "Her lies were a house of cards. You just blew it down with the truth." Their belief in me fueled a fire that burned brighter with each passing day, a flame that refused to be extinguished by the weight of my family's pain or the whispers that followed me like a persistent breeze through the Seattle streets. The road to reconciliation with my father and Margaret loomed as a distant hope, a horizon shrouded in fog that obscured the path forward, a journey I couldn't yet begin. But for now, the victory of exposing Claire's lie was mine to hold, a bittersweet triumph that shaped my path with a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a strength born from the ashes of her deception, ready to face the uncertain future with a determination that refused to waver. The days that followed were a roller coaster of emotions and repercussions, a ride that left me breathless and battered, my spirit tested at every turn. The text from my father lingered on my phone, a digital scar I couldn't erase, its words a constant reminder of the rift I'd widened, a wound that throbbed with every glance. Margaret's silence stretched into a week, her absence a gaping wound in the fabric of our family, her unreturned messages a testament to her heartbreak that cut deeper than any blade, a silence that spoke volumes of the trust she'd lost. I visited a counselor at school, Ms. Rivera, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes that held a depth of understanding, her office a haven of muted colors and gentle advice. "You acted to honor your mother's memory," she said, her voice a soothing balm that eased the raw edges of my guilt, a gentle hand on a bruised soul. "The pain you feel is natural, but your courage was necessary." Her words began to mend the fractures, a slow healing of my spirit that offered a glimmer of peace amidst the storm, a light at the end of a dark tunnel I'd been navigating alone. Work at the community center became a battleground of distraction, the chatter of young voices a temporary escape from the turmoil, but even there, my focus wavered. My students' questions about fractions met with distracted nods, my mind drifting to the dinner's aftermath. My supervisor, Mr. Hayes, pulled me aside again, his office smelling of coffee and worn paper, his concern a steady presence. "You're still off, Emma," he said, his tone a mix of worry and firmness. "Talk to someone if you need to." I nodded, the shame of our family secret burning my cheeks, and he offered more flexibility, a kindness that deepened my solitude as I retreated into my thoughts. Mia and Jake remained my pillars, their support a constant in the shifting sands of my life, their weekly meetups at a quiet diner near Capitol Hill, filled with laughter and strategy, the clink of cutlery a backdrop to our talks. "She can't undo what you've done," Jake said, sliding a new analysis of Claire's texts across the table, a testament to her deceit that reinforced my choice. You're the hero here, even if it hurts. Their faith in me kindled a resolve that grew stronger, a fire that illuminated the path ahead, ready to face the consequences of my actions with a heart fortified by their belief. The community's mixed reactions continued, a dance of approval and disapproval that I navigated with a newfound strength, my head held high despite the judgment that trailed me. At a local park near my school, a classmate, Olivia, offered a shy smile as we sat on a bench, her support a silent vote of confidence that warmed my spirit, while a distant relative's cold glance at a family friend's gathering reminded me of the chasm that separated us, a divide I couldn't yet bridge. The pressure was a forge, shaping me into a warrior tempered by the flames of adversity, and with Mia and Jake by my side, their voices a chorus of encouragement, I faced the uncertain future with a determination that refused to falter. The echoes of Claire's lies began to fade, a distant memory in the light of my triumph, a victory that stood as a testament to my resilience, a strength born from the ashes of her betrayal, ready to guide me through the healing that lay ahead. The days following that explosive dinner left me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. The echoes of Claire's slammed door and the stunned silence of my family reverberating in my mind like a distant thunderclap that refused to fade. I returned to my room, the familiar creak of the floorboards a stark contrast to the chaos I'd unleashed, and sank onto my bed, the folder of evidence now a relic of the battle I'd waged, its contents a testament to the truth I'd forced into the open. The weight of my father's text, "Stay away for now, Emma. We need space," pressed against my chest like a stone, a cold reminder of the rift I'd widened, while Margaret's silence stretched into a void that gnawed at my resolve, a silence that spoke of her pain and my isolation. I'd expected a surge of relief after exposing Claire's lies, a cleansing wave to wash away the bitterness, but instead, I felt a hollow ache, a tangled mix of victory for my mother's honor and loss for the family I'd known, a duality that twisted my emotions into knots. Yet, beneath that ache, a quiet strength began to stir, a resolve to rebuild what I could salvage and protect myself with the wisdom I'd gained. The journey ahead promised challenges, but I was ready to face it, step by step, with the lessons of this ordeal as my guide. Claire's transformation emerged slowly, a reluctant evolution born from the ruins of her deceit, a phoenix struggling to rise from the ashes she'd created. A week after the confrontation, she reached out with a tentative text, her words sparse and hesitant. "I'm sorry, Emma. Can we talk?" A stark departure from the commanding tone she'd wielded at dinner. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the reply button, wary of being drawn back into her orbit, but curiosity nudged me to agree. We met at a quiet park near Capitol Hill, the air crisp with the scent of pine, where she sat on a bench, her hands twisting in her lap. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you," she said, her voice low, her eyes avoiding mine. "I've started seeing a counselor to understand my actions." She admitted to repaying a loan she'd taken from my father, a small gesture of amends, and promised to respect my mother's memory moving forward. Over the next month, she sent weekly updates, "Paid back $200 this week." Each message a fragile olive branch that chipped away at my anger. Though I kept my distance, my heart guarded by the scars she'd left. Her change wasn't complete. Old habits lingered like a late-night call asking for advice on mending family ties. But it was a beginning, a flicker of hope in the wreckage. She even began journaling her reflections, sharing snippets that revealed her struggle to reconcile her actions, a vulnerability that surprised me and softened my stance slightly. My own growth took root in the aftermath, a phoenix rising with a newfound confidence that felt like armor forged in the fire of adversity. I sought guidance from Ms. Rivera, the school counselor, whose office became a sanctuary of soft light and gentle wisdom, where I unpacked the guilt that had clung to me like damp clothing. "You acted to honor your mother's legacy," she said, her voice a steady anchor in my turbulent emotions, a lifeline that pulled me from the depths. "The regret you feel reflects your love, but it's time to embrace your strength." Her words reshaped me, teaching me to set boundaries without shame, a skill that transformed my relationships from fragile threads to steel cables. At the community center, I threw myself into tutoring, designing a reading program for younger kids. The hours spent crafting lessons a distraction from the pain, and my efforts earned praise from Mr. Hayes, a nod that bolstered my spirit. He offered me a leadership role, a position that demanded the assertiveness I'd honed, and I accepted, my voice firm, a stark contrast to the hesitant tones of my past. The weight of family expectations lifted, replaced by a self-assurance that shielded me from the judgment that lingered like a faint mist over Seattle's streets. The relationship with my father and Margaret evolved into a fragile new normal, a tapestry woven with threads of hope and caution. 2 months after the confrontation, Peter called, his voice gruff but softened by a trace of warmth, a sound that hinted at a thaw in his anger. "We've been talking, Emma," he said, his words measured. "We're not ready to see Claire yet, but we miss you. Can we meet?" We agreed to gather at a neutral cafe near Pike Place Market, the air thick with unspoken words, as we sat with coffee cooling between us, the hum of the crowd a delicate backdrop. Margaret's eyes were red-rimmed, her hand trembling as she reached for mine across the table, her fingers cold against my skin. "We were wrong to let it escalate," she admitted, her voice a whisper carrying the weight of her regret. "You protected something sacred." The reconciliation was tentative, marked by awkward silences that stretched like shadows and stilted conversations that danced around the edges of our hurt. But it was progress, a seedling pushing through cracked soil. They began visiting occasionally, bringing homemade scones that filled my kitchen with the scent of butter, a gesture that mended some fractures. Peter asked about my work, a rare curiosity that warmed me, though the topic of Claire remained a minefield we navigated with care. The distance was painful, a scar that throbbed with memory, but it taught me the value of boundaries, a lesson etched into my heart, allowing love to flourish without suffocation. Claire's efforts to rebuild her life gained traction, a slow climb from the pit she dug, a journey of redemption that unfolded with each tentative step. She moved into a small apartment near Queen Anne, working part-time at a local bookstore, her social media posts shifting from confident boasts to humble updates about saving money. One afternoon, she appeared at my door, a small envelope in hand, her knock hesitant but firm. "It's the first $300 I saved," she said, her eyes downcast, avoiding my gaze as if ashamed. "And I'm sorry, Emma, for everything, the lies, the pain, the way I tried to replace her." I took the money, my fingers brushing hers, a fleeting contact that carried the weight of our history, and nodded, the gesture a step toward forgiveness I wasn't ready to fully embrace, a door left ajar rather than flung wide. She started attending a support group for step-parents, a choice that surprised me, and shared progress reports via text. Learned about boundaries today, each one a brick in a bridge we might one day cross. Her change wasn't flawless, old habits lingered, like a late-night call asking for advice on mending family ties, but it was a start, a flicker of hope in the ashes. She also began volunteering at a community kitchen, a sign of her attempt to rebuild trust, her actions slowly aligning with her words. My future began to take shape, a canvas I painted with intention and care, each stroke a reflection of the strength I'd unearthed. I planned a solo trip to the Olympic Peninsula, a week to clear my mind, booking a cabin with views of the rugged coastline, a reward for my resilience earned through fire. The thought of the waves crashing against the shore filled me with anticipation, a promise of renewal that steadied my nerves, the sound of the ocean, a melody I longed to hear. At the community center, I mentored a new volunteer, a shy girl named Sophie, who reminded me of my younger self, sharing lessons of standing firm, my leadership a mirror of the courage I'd discovered. The reading program I led won a local award, a certificate that sat on my desk, a tangible symbol of my growth that bolstered my confidence, its frame a reminder of my progress. Mia and Jake remained my pillars, inviting me to art nights that filled my room with laughter, a sound that had nearly vanished, replaced by the joy of their company, their canvases and code a testament to our bond. We discussed launching a support group for teens dealing with step-family challenges, a project that felt like a calling, a way to turn my pain into purpose, a community where stories like mine could find solace and strength. In Seattle, where whispers had once judged me, I joined a youth gardening club, planting seeds alongside peers who offered quiet smiles, a sign of acceptance that healed old wounds with each new sprout, the soil a canvas for my renewal. The lesson I carried was profound, a revelation that reshaped my understanding of love and self. Boundaries are the bedrock of true relationships. I learned to say no, to protect my peace without the guilt that had once chained me, a skill that transformed my interactions from fragile threads to steel cables capable of bearing the weight of truth. With Claire, I set clear limits. No more intrusions into my mother's memory, no unsolicited visits that reopened old wounds, guiding her toward respect with a firm but fair hand, a teacher rather than a savior, my words a gentle but unyielding boundary. With Peter and Margaret, I established regular calls on Sunday mornings, avoiding past triggers, fostering a cautious trust that grew with each chat about neutral topics like the weather or my projects, a trust that allowed love to breathe without strain, their voices a balm to my soul. The betrayal had stripped away illusions, revealing that love demands strength, not blind loyalty, a love that stands firm against deceit and honors the past. As I stood in the garden one evening, the soil cool and rich beneath my fingers, the scent of earth and blossoms mingling with the Seattle breeze, I felt a peace I hadn't known, a growth rooted in the ashes of that painful truth, ready to bloom into a future of my own design, a future where I defined my worth with clarity and courage. The gardening club became a sanctuary, a place where I found solace among strangers who became allies in my journey. I learned to tend roses, my fingers stained with green from the leaves, the thorns a reminder of the resilience I'd gained, and shared stories with an elderly member, Mr. Thompson, who listened with a nod as I spoke of my family's fracture, his wisdom a quiet guide. His advice, "Healing comes from pruning the deadwood," resonated deeply, a metaphor for the boundaries I'd set that allowed new growth to flourish. At the community center, I organized a storytelling event, a weekend where my leadership shone, earning respect from peers who'd once seen me as reserved, their applause a validation of my strength. The role brought challenges, like mediating a dispute between volunteers over scheduling, a task I handled with the calm I'd learned from Ms. Rivera, her lessons echoing in my measured words. Mia suggested a photography class to capture my journey, and we laughed over blurry shots of the Seattle skyline, a lightness that mended my spirit, the click of the shutter a new rhythm in my life. Jake proposed a charity walk to raise funds for grieving teens, and we trained together, the rhythm of our steps a beat of solidarity, our breaths synchronizing as we pushed through the rain-soaked trails. Claire's progress continued, a slow dance of redemption that unfolded with each effort to make amends. She enrolled in a conflict resolution course, her texts detailing lessons on empathy that hinted at a shift in her perspective, a change I watched with cautious optimism. One afternoon, she brought a letter, pages filled with her reflections on her jealousy and mistakes, and read aloud an apology that brought tears to my eyes, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion. "I see now how I wronged you, how I let my insecurities blind me," she said, her hands clutching the paper. I offered to help her draft a letter to my father, a small step toward mending their bond, though I kept my guard up, my trust a fragile thread. Peter and Margaret sent an invitation to a family brunch at a cozy diner near Ballard. A tentative olive branch I accepted with cautious hope, the scent of fresh coffee a welcome change. The meal was tense, the clink of cutlery a nervous rhythm, but their smiles over pastries hinted at healing, a silent promise of reconciliation. My trip to the peninsula loomed, a promise of solitude, and I packed with anticipation, selecting books and a journal, ready to write my next chapter with a clear mind. The support group idea took shape, with Mia sketching a logo of a rising phoenix, a project that turned my pain into a beacon, its mission statement a manifesto of hope. The reconciliation with Peter deepened through small, meaningful gestures. One Saturday, he invited me to help repair his old truck in the garage, the air thick with the scent of oil and metal, a space where we'd once worked with my mother. As we tightened bolts side by side, he admitted, "I was scared of losing you both to this mess." His vulnerability unlocked a conversation, a bridge across our divide, his hands steadying mine as we turned a wrench. Margaret began joining us, her baking sessions a quiet peace offering, her stories of her own youth in Maine a way to connect, her laughter a thread that wove us closer. Liam, too, showed signs of change, asking about our mother's favorite recipes, his curiosity a healing balm, his small hands helping me knead dough one afternoon. These moments rebuilt trust, a fragile but growing bond, their presence a warmth that thawed the ice between us. My future plans expanded, volunteering at a youth shelter to support others, exploring college options in psychology, each step a testament to my growth, a path illuminated by the strength I'd forged. The lesson of boundaries guided me, a compass for love and self-worth, shaping my interactions with a newfound clarity. With Claire, my limits were a shield, with Peter and Margaret, a bridge, and with myself, a foundation for peace. As I planted a final rose, its petals unfolding under the Seattle dusk, I felt the past dissolve, a story of resilience defining me, a strength born from the ashes of betrayal, ready to embrace a future where I stood tall, unburdened by the shadows of deceit. Reflecting on this turbulent journey, I've come to see that Claire's audacious claim to replace my mother's legacy didn't just wound me, it reshaped my entire understanding of what family truly means. The emotional tempest of that dinner, where her words sparked a fire of defiance within me, the quiet strength I found in exposing her lies, and the gradual healing with my father and Margaret have taught me that family is not about erasing the past, but about embracing it with unwavering courage and respect. That pivotal moment when I turned her arrogance into a mirror of her own deceit marked a profound turning point, a liberation that illuminated a path of self-discovery I hadn't anticipated. Claire's tentative steps toward redemption, her apologies whispered in the shadows, her efforts to rebuild trust hint at a fragile growth, a seed struggling to take root in the soil of her regret, while I've emerged with a resilience that anchors me beyond the reach of her manipulations. My father and Margaret are weaving a new bond with me, their visits and shared silences a testament to a love that endures, a love that now flows through open channels rather than hidden currents. This transformation has shown me that my worth isn't defined by those who seek to overwrite my history. It's forged in the fire of my resolve to protect what's sacred. The strength I've gained is a beacon, guiding me toward a future where I shape my own destiny, unburdened by the shadows of betrayal. As I prepare for my trip to the Olympic Peninsula, I envision days of solitude by the rugged coast, the sound of waves a symphony that soothes my soul, and nights spent journaling my thoughts, each page a step toward clarity. The support group I'm building with Mia and Jake promises to be a haven for others, a space where teens can share their struggles with stepfamily dynamics, turning my pain into a shared strength that lifts us all. In this journey, I've learned that every scar tells a story of survival, and every boundary I set is a declaration of my worth, a lesson that will light my way as I navigate the years ahead. Have you ever had to defend your past against someone's attempt to erase it? What strength did you find within yourself to stand tall? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale touched your heart, please like and subscribe to join others navigating their own paths of truth. Remember, your value shines through your courage to protect your story, even when others try to rewrite it. Thank you for walking this road with me. Until next time, hold on to your strength and know you're enough just as you are.